Dr. Zethrin stood before the massive viewing screen in his laboratory aboard the Council Research Station, his 6 crystalline eyes studying the data streams that flowed across the display like rivers of light. The information about the newly discovered species from the third planet of star system, Sol 3, made him shake his triangular head in what other species might call disbelief. These creatures called humans were unlike anything the Galactic Council had encountered in their 1,000-year exploration of the galaxy. The biological scans were troubling. The beings had hollow bones made of simple calcium, skin so thin that sharp objects could pierce it easily, and internal organs that seemed to float freely inside their bodies without proper protection. They had no natural armor like the Nexari, no regenerative abilities like the Vorthon, and no energy projection capabilities like his own crystalline people. Most shocking of all, they required a specific mixture of gases to breathe, and their bodies would shut down completely if deprived of this oxygen for mere minutes. Zethrin turned to his assistant, a young Nexari named Keth Mol, whose crystal body reflected the laboratory lights in brilliant patterns. "Look at these readings again," Zethrin said, pointing one of his long crystal fingers at the display. "Their bone density is 60% lower than the galactic standard. Their muscle fibers tear under stress levels that most species would consider light exercise. How did such fragile beings ever survive long enough to develop space travel?" Keth Mol examined the data with 2 of his eyes while the other 4 continued monitoring other displays. "Perhaps they developed technology specifically because they were too weak to survive without it," he suggested. "The scans show they use mechanical devices for almost everything. Transportation, communication, even basic tool usage seems to require artificial enhancement." Meanwhile, millions of kilometers away in the outer regions of the Sol system, Captain Jake Morrison guided his exploration vessel Terra Nova through the asteroid belt with practiced ease. The ship was humanity's latest deep space explorer designed to make contact with alien civilizations and establish diplomatic relations. Jake had been chosen for this mission because of his calm demeanor and ability to handle unexpected situations, skills that were about to be tested in ways he never imagined. The proximity alarms began sounding softly, indicating an unknown vessel approaching from the direction of Jupiter. Jake called his crew to alert status and moved to the main bridge, where his communications officer, Lisa Park, was already trying to establish contact with the approaching ship. The vessel that appeared on their screens was unlike anything in human databases, a sleek construction of what appeared to be living crystal that moved through space without any visible propulsion system. "Unknown vessel. This is Captain Jake Morrison of the Earth ship Terra Nova," Jake broadcast on all frequencies. "We come in peace and wish to establish communication." The response came in perfect English, though the voice sounded like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "Human vessel Terra Nova, this is Commander Vex High of the Nexari exploration ship Crystal Song. We represent the Galactic Council and have been expecting your arrival in this region of space." Jake felt his heart rate increase, but kept his voice steady. "Commander Vex High, we greet you on behalf of the human species and the planet Earth. We seek peaceful contact with other intelligent species. Permission granted to dock with our vessel, Captain Morrison. We have much to discuss regarding your species and their future in the galaxy." As the Terra Nova approached the alien ship, Jake could see other crew members through transparent sections of the crystal hull. They appeared to be made of the same crystalline material as their ship, tall beings that moved with fluid grace and seemed to communicate through patterns of light that flowed across their bodies. When the docking was complete and atmospheric seals were confirmed compatible, Jake and his first officer, Steve Collins, prepared to make humanity's first face-to-face contact with an alien species. Commander Vex High met them in what appeared to be a conference room, though the walls were transparent crystal that showed the stars beyond. The alien leader was 3 meters tall, his body a sculpture of living blue crystal that refracted the room's light into rainbow patterns. When he spoke, The sound came from resonances within his crystalline structure rather than from any visible mouth. Captain Morrison, your species has achieved something remarkable in developing space travel despite your obvious physical limitations, HFY began, his tone carrying what seemed like sympathy. The Galactic Council has studied the preliminary reports about humans, and we are concerned for your survival. Jake exchanged a quick glance with Steve before responding. We appreciate your concern, Commander, but humanity has been quite successful in adapting to challenges throughout our history. Yes, we have observed this adaptation, HFY replied, and lights flickered across his body in patterns that Jake was beginning to recognize as expressions of emotion. Your species appears to compensate for physical weakness through technological development and social cooperation. It is admirable, but we fear it may not be sufficient for survival in a galaxy filled with much stronger and more dangerous species. The conversation continued for several hours, with HFY explaining the structure of the Galactic Council and the various species that comprised it. Jake learned about beings that could survive in the vacuum of space, others that could regenerate from almost any injury, and civilizations that had existed for millions of years. With each description, he began to understand why the aliens viewed humanity as fragile and in need of protection. The Council has decided to extend our protection to your species, HFY announced as their meeting concluded. We will establish a research station in your system to study human biology and culture, and we will provide guidance to help your people avoid the dangers that have destroyed so many other fragile species. Jake thanked the commander politely, though he felt a growing unease about being classified as a species that needed protection. As the Terra Nova departed from the Crystal Song, he couldn't shake the feeling that the aliens had fundamentally misunderstood something important about humanity, though he couldn't quite identify what that something might be. Dr. Lisa Carter stood in the newly constructed conference room on Luna Station, looking out at the Earth through the reinforced, transparent aluminum windows while waiting for the Galactic Council representatives to arrive. As Earth's lead xenobiologist, she had been chosen to explain human capabilities to the alien scientists, who seemed convinced that humanity was on the verge of extinction. The irony was not lost on her that she was meeting them on humanity's moon, a celestial body that humans had been visiting regularly for over a century. The doors slid open with a soft hiss, and Dr. Zethran entered along with his assistant Kethmol and Commander HFY. The crystalline beings moved with an ethereal grace that made Lisa momentarily envious, their bodies catching and refracting the artificial lighting in ways that created moving patterns of color across the room's walls. Dr. Carter, we appreciate your willingness to help us understand your species better, Zethran began, his voice carrying harmonics that human ears could barely detect. Our initial studies have raised many concerns about human survival prospects, and we hope you can provide insights that will help us develop appropriate protection protocols. Lisa gestured for the aliens to take seats around the conference table, though she noticed they seemed to prefer hovering slightly above the chairs rather than actually sitting. I appreciate your concern for humanity, Dr. Zethran, but I think there may be some misunderstandings about our capabilities and our history. She activated the holographic display system and began showing images of human athletic competitions, starting with marathon runners crossing finish lines after covering 42 kilometers on foot. These humans have been running for over 4 hours continuously, she explained. This is considered a recreational activity that thousands of humans participate in regularly. Kethmol's crystal body flickered with patterns that Lisa was learning to recognize as confusion. Dr. Carter, these images appear to show humans pushing their bodies beyond safe operational limits. Why do they engage in such dangerous behavior? It's not dangerous for us, Lisa replied, switching to images of Olympic weightlifters. These athletes are lifting objects that weigh more than their own bodies. Human muscles are designed to operate at varying levels of intensity, and we actually become stronger when we regularly challenge our physical limits. Zethran studied the displays with obvious concern. But surely this represents the absolute peak performance of your species. These individuals must represent a tiny fraction of your population who have been genetically enhanced or surgically modified. Lisa smiled and shook her head. These are normal humans, Dr. Zethrin. No genetic modifications, no surgical enhancements. With proper training, almost any healthy human could achieve similar results. In fact, let me show you something else. The display changed to show footage from human emergency response teams. Firefighters carrying unconscious victims from burning buildings, rescue workers pulling survivors from earthquake rubble, and paramedics performing life-saving procedures under extreme conditions. These are ordinary humans doing their jobs, Lisa explained. They regularly expose themselves to dangerous conditions to help others. Commander Vexhi's body dimmed noticeably as he observed the footage. This confirms our fears, Dr. Carter. Your species is so fragile that individuals must constantly risk death just to maintain basic social functions. These rescue workers are clearly sacrificing themselves because your people cannot survive even minor environmental hazards. You're misinterpreting what you're seeing, Lisa said, though she could hear the frustration creeping into her voice. These humans are not sacrificing themselves. They're using their training, equipment, and natural abilities to help others in crisis situations. Most of them will go home safely to their families after completing these rescues. She switched to medical footage showing human healing processes, time-lapse images of cuts closing, bones mending, and bruises fading. Human bodies are designed to repair themselves from most injuries. We may not regenerate as quickly as some species, but our healing processes are remarkably efficient. Kethmal examined the medical data with several of his eyes while keeping others focused on Lisa. The healing rates appear extremely slow compared to Nexari standards. It takes your people weeks or months to recover from injuries that we repair in hours. This supports our assessment that humans are operating at the very edge of biological viability. Lisa realized that the aliens were interpreting every human capability through the lens of their own abilities and finding humanity lacking by comparison. Dr. Zethrin, may I ask about Nexari healing? How does your regeneration work? Our crystalline structure allows us to rebuild damaged sections by drawing minerals from our environment, Zethrin explained. We can regrow lost limbs in a matter of hours and repair internal damage almost instantly. That's remarkable, Lisa said genuinely. But it also means you need specific mineral environments to heal, correct? What happens if you're injured in a location that lacks the minerals you need? The three aliens exchanged patterns of light that Lisa interpreted as uncomfortable silence. Finally, Vexhi responded, Nexari avoid environments that cannot support our healing requirements. It would be unwise to venture into such areas. Humans heal anywhere, Lisa said quietly. Our bodies carry everything they need to repair themselves. We don't require specific environmental conditions or external resources. When we're injured, we adapt and continue functioning while our bodies work to fix the damage. She brought up new footage, this time showing human athletes competing in extreme environments. Swimmers in near-freezing water, runners in desert heat, climbers scaling mountains in thin atmosphere. We also adapt to environmental conditions that would be lethal to many species. Humans live permanently in climates ranging from Arctic cold to tropical heat, at altitudes from sea level to high mountains. This appears to be more evidence of humans being forced to live in marginal environments due to their inability to modify their surroundings adequately, Kethmal observed. Other species would simply terraform these hostile regions or relocate to more suitable planets. Lisa felt her patience wearing thin. We choose to live in these environments. Humans enjoy challenges and find satisfaction in overcoming obstacles. What you see as survival desperation, we see as exploration and adventure. The meeting continued for several more hours, with Lisa presenting evidence of human adaptability, resilience, and problem-solving abilities. She showed them examples of human innovation, art, literature, and scientific achievement. But no matter What she presented, the aliens interpreted it through their framework of humans as a fragile species desperately clinging to survival. As the session ended, Dr. Zethran summarized their conclusions. Dr. Carter, your presentation has been enlightening, but it confirms our initial assessment. Humans have developed remarkable coping mechanisms for their physical limitations, but these adaptations represent the desperate measures of a species living on the edge of extinction. The Galactic Council will proceed with implementing protection protocols to ensure human survival. Lisa watched the aliens leave, feeling a growing sense of unease. The Council meant well, but their fundamental misunderstanding of human nature could lead to restrictions that would be devastating to human civilization. As she looked out at Earth through the station windows, she wondered how long it would be before the aliens discovered that their assumptions about human fragility were not just wrong, but dangerously wrong. Commander Thrixka of the Vrex Empire intercepted the Galactic Council's communications about the newly discovered human species from the bridge of his assault cruiser, and the insectoid's compound eyes glittered with what his species considered amusement. The Vrex had built their empire by conquering weaker species and using them as slave labor, and the Council's report suggested that these humans would be perfect additions to their workforce. The intercepted data described beings so physically weak that they required mechanical assistance for basic tasks, so fragile that minor injuries could incapacitate them for weeks, and so dependent on specific environmental conditions that they could not survive outside their home planet without extensive life support systems. To Thrixka, this sounded like the ideal servant species, intelligent enough to operate complex machinery, but too weak to resist Vrex authority. Navigation Officer Vextal set course for the human colony world designated New Austin. Thrixka clicked, his mandibles creating the sharp sounds that served as Vrex speech. We will acquire specimens of this fragile species before the Council can extend their protection. The Vrex raiding fleet consisted of 5 assault cruisers and a dozen fighter craft, more than enough firepower to overwhelm any defenses that such a weak species might have constructed. As they approached the New Austin system, Thrixka reviewed the intelligence reports about the colony, which had been established only 3 years earlier and housed approximately 50,000 humans engaged in mining operations on the planet's 3 moons. Ben Rogers was reviewing the monthly production reports in the colony administration building when the proximity alarms began sounding throughout New Austin colony. As the elected administrator, Ben had been chosen for his ability to coordinate complex logistics and maintain morale during difficult situations, skills that were about to be tested beyond anything he had experienced during the colony's establishment. Amy, what do the sensors show? Ben called to Amy Walsh, the colony's chief mechanic and unofficial head of technical operations. Amy was bent over a console, her hands flying across the control surfaces as she tried to make sense of the readings. 5. Large ships and multiple smaller craft, Ben, Amy replied, her voice tight with concentration. They're not broadcasting any identification signals, and their approach vector suggests hostile intent. These aren't council ships or human vessels. Ben felt his stomach tighten as he realized that New Austin was about to face humanity's first contact with a hostile alien species. The colony had basic defensive systems designed to protect against asteroid impacts and space debris, but nothing that could stand against military spacecraft. Sound general alarm and begin evacuation procedures for non-essential personnel. Get me Captain Frank Miller at the security office. Within minutes, Captain Miller arrived at the administration building along with his security team. Frank was a former Earth military officer who had volunteered for colony duty, and his experience would prove invaluable in the coming hours. Ben, our defensive capabilities are limited, Frank said bluntly. We have mining charges that could be rigged as explosives and some small arms for dealing with wildlife, but nothing designed for space combat. What about the mining equipment? Amy asked, her mind already working on potential solutions. We have industrial lasers, heavy machinery, and excavation charges. Maybe we can improvise something. The alien ships entered orbit around New Austin and immediately began broadcasting demands in broken English that they had apparently learned from intercepted human communications. Human colony, this is Commander Thrixka of the Vrex Empire. Your species is now under Vrex protection. Prepare for immediate relocation to designated work facilities. Ben grabbed the communication system microphone. Unknown vessels. This is Administrator Ben Rogers of New Austin Colony. We are a peaceful settlement under the protection of the Galactic Council. State your intentions. Galactic Council protection is irrelevant, came the reply. Vrex Empire claims this system and all human resources within it. Resistance will result in termination of human specimens. The first Vrex landing craft began descending toward the colony's main settlement, and Ben made a decision that would change everything. Frank, begin defensive operations. Amy, get those mining charges rigged as defensive weapons. Everyone else, begin evacuation, but be ready to support defensive operations if needed. The Vrex soldiers that emerged from the landing craft were impressive specimens, each standing over 2 meters tall with armored carapaces that could deflect small arms, fire, and multiple limbs that ended in razor-sharp claws. They moved with the confidence of predators who had never encountered meaningful resistance from their prey. What they found instead was a colony that refused to surrender. The humans had quickly converted their mining lasers into defensive weapons, rigged explosive charges at strategic locations, and turned their heavy construction equipment into improvised armored vehicles. When the Vrex advanced on the main settlement, they were met by a barrage of laser fire from positions that seemed impossible for such fragile beings to have constructed so quickly. Amy led a team of mechanics and engineers in a desperate effort to create defensive weapons from mining equipment. They mounted industrial cutting lasers on tracked vehicles, rigged excavation charges as anti-personnel mines, and used construction mechs as improvised battlesuits. The humans worked with a speed and efficiency that the Vrex found disturbing, adapting their tools for warfare in ways that seemed to violate the aliens' understanding of how primitive species should behave. The first assault was repelled, but Thrixka was more puzzled than concerned. These humans fight with desperation beyond normal survival instinct, he observed to his tactical officer. Perhaps their weakness makes them more dangerous when cornered. The second assault involved heavier weapons and more Vrex soldiers, but, again, the humans adapted. They had learned from the first attack, modified their defenses, and developed new tactics that exploited the Vrex assumption that humans would break and run when faced with superior force. Instead, the humans seemed to become more determined and creative with each attack. Frank coordinated the defensive efforts with military precision, but he was amazed by the civilian colonists who had volunteered to fight. Teachers, scientists, farmers, and technicians had taken up weapons and were fighting with a ferocity that seemed to contradict everything the aliens believed about human fragility. When Vrex soldiers broke through defensive lines, they found humans who refused to retreat, choosing instead to engage in close combat despite their apparent physical disadvantages. Dr. Zethran, monitoring the situation from his research station, was recording observations that challenged everything the Galactic Council believed about human nature. The humans are not behaving according to our projections, he noted in his research log. When faced with overwhelming force, they do not surrender or flee. Instead, they appear to enter an enhanced combat state that increases their efficiency and determination. The battle for New Austin continued through the day and into the night, with the humans demonstrating an ability to fight in conditions that should have been impossible for such fragile beings. They fought in damaged buildings, in vacuum, when sections of the colony lost atmosphere, and continued coordinated resistance even when cut off from central command. Amy found herself leading a group of colonists in defending the power station that supplied the colony's life support systems. When Vrex soldiers broke through the outer defenses, she grabbed a plasma cutter and charged directly at creatures that were twice her size and covered in natural armor. The aliens were so surprised by this apparently suicidal attack that they hesitated just long enough for Amy's team to drive them back. As night fell on New Austin, Thrixka was forced to acknowledge that his easy conquest had become a prolonged siege. The humans had not only refused to surrender, they had actually succeeded in inflicting casualties on Vrek's forces, while suffering surprisingly few losses themselves. Most disturbing of all, they seemed to be getting better at fighting with each engagement, learning and adapting at a rate that the Vreks found deeply unsettling. Sergeant Rick Taylor had been teaching colonial defense tactics to civilian volunteers when the Vreks attacked, but now he found himself leading a guerrilla war that was unlike anything in his military experience. Rick had served in 3 conflicts on Earth before volunteering for colonial duty, and he understood that conventional resistance would fail against the superior Vreks technology and numbers. What the aliens did not understand was that humans had been fighting asymmetric warfare for thousands of years. The Vreks brought reinforcements during the second day, confident that the humans' desperate resistance would collapse once faced with overwhelming force. Commander Thrixka had called for additional assault cruisers and a full battalion of Vrek shock troops, creatures bred specifically for conquering stubborn populations. What arrived instead was a lesson in human adaptability that would reshape the galaxy's understanding of warfare. Rick gathered the surviving colonists in the abandoned mining tunnels beneath New Austin, where the Vrek sensors could not detect them easily. "Listen carefully," he told the group of farmers, engineers, teachers, and scientists who had become his impromptu army. "We cannot match them in strength or technology, but we have advantages they do not understand. We know this terrain. We understand their tactics now, and most importantly, we know something about fighting that they have never learned." Amy Walsh raised her hand, her face streaked with dirt and her coveralls torn from the previous day's fighting. "What do you mean, Sergeant? They are bigger, stronger, and better armed than we are." "They fight like predators," Rick explained, sketching diagrams in the tunnel floor with a piece of broken concrete. "Big, overwhelming force, expecting prey to run or submit. But humans are not prey animals. We are pack hunters, persistence predators. We do not have to win every fight. We just have to make sure they lose the war." The new tactics began immediately. Instead of defending fixed positions, the humans started using hit-and-run attacks that struck Vrek's patrols when they were most vulnerable and disappeared before reinforcements could arrive. They used the colony's mining tunnels as a transportation network, appearing behind enemy lines to sabotage equipment and vanishing before the aliens could respond. Dr. Peter Stone, the colony's geologist, had studied the local terrain extensively and knew every cave, ravine, and unstable rock formation on the planet. "The Vreks are setting up their main base on what they think is solid ground," he told Rick during a planning session. "But there are limestone caverns underneath that area. If we could collapse them—" "Can we do it without bringing down the whole settlement?" Rick asked. "I think so, but it would require precise placement of charges and perfect timing," Peter replied. "We would need to get close to their base without being detected." The plan that emerged was audacious even by human standards. A team led by Amy would infiltrate the Vrek's base using the colony's maintenance tunnels, plant charges at critical support points, and escape before the explosions brought down the alien command center. It was exactly the kind of plan that seemed impossible for such fragile beings to execute, which was precisely why it might work. Meanwhile, other human teams began psychological warfare tactics that exploited the Vrek's expectation of how conquered populations should behave. They left messages for the aliens written in their own language, having learned Vrek's script from captured equipment. The messages were not threats or demands, but questions that challenged Vrek's assumptions about their own superiority. Kate Phillips, a former Marine Corps veteran who had been working as the colony's security chief, led a team that specialized in capturing Vrek's equipment and personnel. When the aliens attempted to interrogate captured humans, they discovered something that contradicted everything they believed about fragile species. The humans did not break under pressure, they did not reveal information about their resistance operations, and they seemed to become more determined rather than more cooperative as interrogation continued. Human female, you will provide locations of remaining resistance fighters. The Vrex interrogator clicked at Kate, who was secured to a chair in what had been the colony's community center. Kate looked directly at the alien with steady eyes that showed no fear. I am Kate Phillips, Security Chief of New Austin Colony. That is all the information you will receive from me. The Vrex tried various interrogation techniques that had proven effective against other species, but Kate responded to each attempt with the same calm refusal to cooperate. When they increased physical pressure, she adapted and endured. When they tried psychological manipulation, she countered with questions about Vrex motivations that made her captors uncomfortable. Why do you assume that conquest makes you strong? Kate asked during one session. On Earth, we learned that true strength comes from protecting others, not from dominating them. The interrogator found himself drawn into philosophical discussions that he had never experienced with other captured species. Other conquered populations had begged, pleaded, or broken down under pressure. This human seemed genuinely curious about Vrex culture and society, asking questions that forced the aliens to examine their own motivations and beliefs. Carlos Martinez, the colony's chief engineer, had been working with a team of technicians to reverse engineer captured Vrex technology. What they discovered amazed even Rick, who had thought he understood human adaptability. Not only were the humans figuring out how alien devices worked, they were improving upon the designs and creating hybrid technologies that combined human innovation with Vrex engineering. Look at this, Carlos said, showing Rick a modified Vrex energy weapon. Their power cells are efficient but inflexible. We have added human battery technology that allows variable output and rapid recharging. This weapon is now more versatile than the original. The modifications went beyond simple improvements. The humans were adapting Vrex technology for purposes the aliens had never considered, turning communication devices into improvised sensors, converting transportation equipment into weapons platforms, and using Vrex construction materials to create defensive systems that were more effective than anything the aliens had built. When Amy's team successfully collapsed the Vrex command center, the explosion was heard throughout the colony. But more than the physical damage, the psychological impact on the alien forces was devastating. A species that they had classified as too weak to resist effectively had just destroyed their most secure installation using a combination of human ingenuity and captured alien technology. Thrixka stood in the ruins of his command post, his compound eyes trying to process what had happened. The humans had not only refused to surrender, they had actually gone on the offensive. Worse yet, they were using Vrex equipment against them, and doing it more effectively than many species the Vrex had fought in the past. Commander, we are receiving reports of human raids on our supply lines, communication intercepts, and equipment theft, his tactical officer reported. They appeared to be coordinating operations across the entire planet, using methods our sensors cannot track. How is this possible? Thrixka demanded. These creatures are supposed to be fragile and dependent on artificial life support. How are they operating in damaged areas of the colony without environmental suits? The answer was becoming clear to observers throughout the galaxy who were monitoring the conflict. Humans were not fragile survivors clinging to life through technology. They were adaptable predators who had evolved to thrive in hostile environments through intelligence, cooperation, and an absolute refusal to surrender when protecting their own people. Dr. Zethrin, watching from his research station, began updating his files with observations that would revolutionize galactic understanding of human capabilities. Subject species demonstrates unprecedented ability to adapt tactics in real time, repurpose available resources for combat applications, and maintain coordinated resistance despite communication disruption and territorial losses, he recorded. Preliminary classification as fragile species appears to have been fundamentally incorrect. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened as reports of the human resistance at New Austin spread throughout civilized space, and species that had never heard of humanity suddenly found themselves studying tactical reports that challenged fundamental assumptions about warfare and species classification. Commander Vex High stood before the assembled representatives, his crystalline body flickering with patterns that indicated deep concern and confusion. Council members, we are witnessing events that contradict our scientific understanding of the human species, Vex High announced, activating holographic displays that showed real-time footage from the New Austin conflict. The beings we classified as fragile and in need of protection are currently engaged in successful military operations against one of the galaxy's most aggressive warrior species. Dr. Zethran's research data was being transmitted simultaneously to xenobiologists across the galaxy, and the implications were staggering. Species that had existed for millions of years were being forced to reconsider their understanding of what constituted strength and military effectiveness. The humans were not winning through superior technology or physical power. They were winning through methods that most galactic civilizations had never encountered. Captain Jake Morrison received the emergency transmission from Earth Fleet Command while his ship, the newly commissioned UES Defiant, was conducting routine patrol operations near Titan. The message was brief but clear. Proceed immediately to New Austin System to provide support for the embattled colony. Jake had been hoping for months that humanity would be able to prove itself worthy of galactic respect, but he had never imagined it would happen under these circumstances. Communications Officer Danny Kim, signal the fleet, Jake ordered, as the Defiant changed course toward the conflict zone. Tell Admiral Nancy Foster that we are proceeding to New Austin as ordered and will provide tactical updates as soon as we arrive in system. The human fleet that responded to the crisis consisted of 6 ships, a force that would have been laughably inadequate against Vrek's military doctrine under normal circumstances. But these were not normal circumstances, and the galaxy was about to witness something that had never been seen before. Humans fighting in space with the same adaptability and determination they had shown on the surface of New Austin. When the human ships arrived in the New Austin system, they found a tactical situation that defied conventional military analysis. The Vrek's fleet was positioned in defensive formations around the planet, not because they were winning, but because they were trying to prevent human ground forces from launching attacks against their orbital assets. Several Vrek's ships showed damage from what appeared to be improvised weapons launched from the planet's surface. Captain Morrison? This is Commander Thrixka, came the transmission from the Vrek's flagship. Remove your vessels from this system immediately. The Vrek's Empire has claimed this territory and these human resources. Jake's response was calm, but carried an edge that made his crew straighten in their seats. Commander Thrixka, this is Captain Jake Morrison of the Earth Fleet vessel Defiant. You are attacking human civilians in violation of galactic law. Withdraw your forces immediately, or face the consequences. Your fragile ships pose no threat to Vrek's military assets, Thrixka replied, but there was less confidence in his voice than there had been when the conflict began. Depart now, and your species will be permitted to negotiate for the return of surviving humans. What happened next sent shockwaves through the galactic community that were monitoring the situation. Instead of withdrawing or negotiating, the human fleet attacked. 6 small ships against a Vrek's fleet that numbered more than 20 vessels, using tactics that seemed to ignore every principle of space warfare that civilized species had developed over millennia. The human ships did not engage in the traditional long-range energy weapon exchanges that characterized most space battles. Instead, they used high-speed maneuvers to close distance rapidly, coordinated their attacks to overwhelm individual Vrek's vessels, and employed weapons that seemed designed specifically to exploit weaknesses in Vrek's ship design that should have been impossible for humans to know about. Lieutenant Sarah Kim, the Defiant's tactical officer, had been studying the captured Vrek's equipment data that Carlos Martinez's team had transmitted from the surface. Captain, the aliens have predictable power distribution patterns. If we can overload their forward shields with concentrated fire, their entire defensive grid will cascade failure. Do it! Jake ordered, and the human fleet began an attack pattern. That seemed suicidal to every observer except the humans themselves. The ships dove directly toward the Vrex battle line, absorbing enemy fire while concentrating their own weapons on precise target points that had been identified through rapid analysis of enemy technology. The first Vrex cruiser suffered catastrophic shield failure and was forced to withdraw from the battle line. The second lost engine power when human weapons targeted specific systems rather than attempting to destroy the entire vessel. By the time the Vrex fleet began to adapt to human tactics, 3 of their ships had been disabled and the humans were already implementing new attack patterns. Dr. Zethrin watched the space battle from his observation post and found himself questioning everything he thought he knew about military science. The humans are not following established combat doctrine, he noted in his research log. They appear to be inventing new tactical methods in real time, based on immediate analysis of enemy capabilities and weaknesses. On the surface of New Austin, the human colonists could see the battle in the sky above them and knew that their fate hung in the balance. But instead of waiting passively for rescue, they launched their own coordinated assault against the remaining Vrex ground forces. Amy Walsh led a team that had converted mining equipment into surface-to-space weapons, and they began targeting Vrex ships that were focused on the space battle above. Rick, if we can hit their landing craft while they are trying to evacuate wounded soldiers, we can prevent them from regrouping, Amy called over the communication system that the humans had jury-rigged from captured alien equipment. The surface attacks coordinated perfectly with the space battle above, creating a 3-dimensional conflict that stretched Vrex tactical capabilities beyond their limits. The aliens found themselves fighting an enemy that refused to follow predictable patterns, that adapted faster than their military computers could calculate responses, and that seemed to view impossible odds as motivation rather than deterrent. Commander, Thrixka made the decision that would echo throughout the galaxy for generations to come. All ships withdraw from the system, he ordered, his voice carrying tones that his crew had never heard before. These humans are not what they appear to be. As the Vrex fleet retreated, the Galactic Council ships that had been racing to prevent a massacre arrived to find human vessels patrolling the system and human ground forces in control of their planet. The aliens who had come to rescue a fragile species instead found victorious warriors who had defeated one of the galaxy's most feared military forces. Captain Morrison opened communication channels with the Council fleet. Council vessels, this is Captain Jake Morrison. New Austin system is secure. Human forces are in control and ready to discuss the terms of Vrex withdrawal with any Council representatives who wish to negotiate. The words sent shockwaves through galactic civilization. A species that had been classified as fragile and in need of protection had just defeated the Vrex Empire in open combat and was now offering to negotiate from a position of strength. Every assumption about human capabilities had been proven wrong, and the galaxy was about to learn that they had been dealing with a far more dangerous species than anyone had imagined. Commander, Vexahai transmitted the news to the Council headquarters with crystalline patterns that indicated profound shock and revision of previously held beliefs. Council command, previous assessment of human capabilities was fundamentally incorrect. Recommend immediate reclassification of species status and urgent review of protection protocols. Humans do not require our protection. The galaxy may require protection from them. The Great Assembly Hall of the Galactic Council had never hosted a session quite like this one. As representatives from hundreds of species gathered to witness the formal reclassification of humanity from protected fragile species to sovereign military power. President Helen Brooks stood at the speaker's podium, looking out at an audience of beings whose understanding of human nature had been fundamentally altered by the events at New Austin. Honored representatives of the Galactic Council, Helen began. her voice carrying clearly through the universal translation systems. Humanity appreciates the concern you have shown for our welfare, but we believe there have been some misunderstandings about our capabilities and our history that need to be addressed. Dr. Zethran sat in the scientific observation section, his research files now containing data that would rewrite xenobiological textbooks throughout the galaxy. His initial assessment of human fragility had been replaced by detailed analysis of human adaptability, persistence, and tactical innovation. The beings he had once pitied as barely surviving weaklings were now classified as one of the most formidable species the galaxy had ever encountered. The Galactic Council initially classified humans as fragile based on physical comparisons with other species. Helen continued. Our bones are less dense than Nexari crystal. Our healing is slower than Vorthan regeneration, and we lack the natural weapons of warrior species like the Krex. But physical strength is only one measure of capability, and perhaps not the most important one. She activated holographic displays that showed human history, starting with early humans hunting mammoth across Ice Age landscapes. Humans evolved as persistence hunters on a world filled with predators stronger, faster, and better armed than ourselves. We survived not through individual strength, but through intelligence, cooperation, and an absolute refusal to surrender when protecting our families and communities. The display shifted to show human conflicts throughout history, demonstrating how a species with no natural weapons had developed increasingly sophisticated tools and tactics. We learned to fight against overwhelming odds not because we were desperate, but because we understood that survival required constant adaptation and improvement. Every challenge made us stronger. Every defeat taught us new methods. Commander Vexhai, now serving as the Council's liaison to humanity, provided commentary that helped the assembled species understand what they had witnessed at New Austin. Human military doctrine does not rely on superior force or technology, he explained. They analyze enemy capabilities, identify weaknesses, and develop countermeasures faster than most species can adapt their defensive systems. Captain Jake Morrison, now wearing the uniform of Earth Fleet Admiral, stood beside President Brooks as she continued her address. The events at New Austin demonstrated something that our species has always known but never needed to articulate. Humans do not fight to dominate others or expand territory. We fight to protect what we value, and when we are fighting for that purpose, we become capable of achievements that surprise even ourselves. Amy Walsh had been invited to address the Council about human technological adaptation, and her presentation left many species reconsidering their own approach to innovation. When the Vrex attacked, we did not have military weapons or defensive systems, she explained. But we had tools, and we understood how to modify those tools for new purposes. Human engineering is based on adaptability rather than optimization for specific functions. The display showed footage of the improvised weapons and defenses that the colonists had created, along with detailed analysis of how they had reverse-engineered and improved upon Vrex technology. In less than 72 hours, we had not only learned to use alien equipment, we had made it work better than the original designers intended. Rick Taylor's tactical analysis of the New Austin defense became required study material at military academies throughout the galaxy. Human warfare is not about destroying the enemy through superior force, he explained to the Council session. It is about making the continuation of conflict more costly than the enemy is willing to pay, while protecting what we value more than our own lives. The Council chambers fell silent as Rick displayed casualty figures from the New Austin conflict. Despite being outgunned and outnumbered by a factor of 10 to 1, human losses had been minimal while Vrex casualties were significant. We achieved this not because we are stronger than the Vrex, but because we fight differently than they expected and adapt faster than they could counter. Dr. Zethran presented his revised scientific findings to the Council's Xenobiological Committee, and his conclusions sent ripples through the galactic scientific community. Human physical characteristics that we initially interpreted as weaknesses are actually evolutionary advantages, he announced. Their lighter bone structure allows for greater mobility and endurance. Their slower healing process is balanced by their ability to continue functioning while injured. Their dependence on oxygen is offset by their ability to survive in environments that would kill most other species. Most significantly, Zethrin continued, humans possess a psychological resilience that allows them to perform beyond their apparent physical limitations when motivated by protection of others. This creates a species that becomes more dangerous as circumstances become more desperate, rather than less capable as we observed with other populations. The formal reclassification ceremony concluded with the presentation of a new treaty that recognized humanity as a fully sovereign military power within the galactic community. The protection protocols that had been developed for human welfare were dissolved, replaced by mutual defense agreements that acknowledged human capability to defend themselves and others. President Brooks signed the treaty documents while addressing the assembled representatives one final time. Humanity does not seek dominance over other species or expansion of territory through conquest. But we will defend ourselves, our allies, and our principles against any force that threatens them. We hope that our experience at New Austin will serve as a reminder that strength comes in many forms, and that underestimating any species based on surface appearances can be a dangerous mistake. Admiral Morrison received new orders that established humanity's role in galactic defense planning. Instead of being protected by other species, humans would now contribute to the protection of weaker civilizations that faced threats from aggressive empires like the Virex. The irony was not lost on anyone present that the species once considered too fragile to survive was now being asked to help defend others. The session concluded with an announcement that surprised even the human delegates. The Galactic Council formally requested that human military advisors be assigned to train other species in adaptive tactics and technological innovation. The methods that had seemed like desperate improvisation at New Austin were now recognized as sophisticated military techniques that could benefit the entire galactic community. As the representatives departed from the Great Assembly Hall, conversations throughout the galaxy reflected a new understanding of what constituted military strength. Physical power and advanced technology were still important, but the human example had demonstrated that adaptability, determination, and tactical innovation could overcome seemingly impossible odds. Admiral Nancy Foster stood on the bridge of the newly commissioned Earth Fleet flagship Terra Prime, watching as human exploration vessels departed for distant star systems. The galaxy was vast and full of unknowns, but humanity had proven that they belonged among the stars not as refugees seeking protection, but as explorers and defenders ready to face whatever challenges awaited them. The final transmission of the day came from the Vrex Empire, a formal communication that acknowledged human sovereignty and proposed negotiations for peaceful coexistence. Commander Thrixka's message was brief but significant. The Vrex Empire recognizes human territorial claims and military capabilities. We wish to establish diplomatic relations based on mutual respect and non-aggression. The galaxy had learned that appearances could be deceiving, that strength came in forms they had never considered, and that a species classified as fragile could become the most formidable force they had ever encountered when fighting for what they believed in. Humanity had earned its place among the stars not through conquest or domination, but by proving that they would never surrender when protecting what they valued most.